Welcome to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Brian Russell, and today it's my privilege to speak with Brandy Anderson. Brandy is a writer and she's a spiritual director who's on an ever-winding contemplative path of becoming. Brandy's a deep thinker. I first came across her work through her Instagram account at Contemplative Reflections. I found her account to be one of those places that I always looked forward to seeing what she posts. She posts mostly her own thinking along with classic quotations from other contemplatives. And Brandy has the ability as a writer and as a spiritual director to describe the interior life, also to raise interesting perspectives that help to bring out what I would call the shadow parts of ourselves so that we can integrate all of us into a life of grace with God. I found this interview to be really interesting, and we get deep. Brandy's a type of spiritual direction is rooted in Jungian psychoanalysis. So she was trained through a program that does stress the works of Carl Jung, which I think is where the shadow work pieces come out. And I was able to get some new insights that I hadn't previously had, and I'm always grateful for that when I get that from a guest. I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I did. You can find out more about Brandy, and we'll have links to her social media and her website in the show notes. And before we jump into the interview, I'd like to remind those of you who are interested in finding out a little bit more about my work, both the books I've written, I have a blog, links to other episodes of the podcast. It's all at brianrussellphd.com. You can also find out information about my coaching that I do for pastors and spiritually minded leaders. If you're also like to go a little deeper into contemplative spirituality, in particular centering prayer, and invite you to sign up for my email list at centeringprayerbook.com. I'll share with you monthly updates on centering prayer, as well as invitations to the monthly centering prayer gathering that I host with my friend and fellow centering prayer author, Rich Lewis. Our next one will be on April 15th, 2023. We generally do meet on the third Saturday of each month at noon. So if you're interested, sign up at centeringprayerbook.com. Now, let's listen in to my conversation with Brandy Anderson. Welcome to the Deep Dive podcast, Brandy. I'm so grateful to have you here today.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be here.
Well, just to get things started, share a little bit about your own faith journey, kind of key moments that have led you to spiritual directions, contemplative spirituality, and in the process of writing and shopping a book for publication.
Sure. So I was raised in a Christian family, primarily Methodist, Baptist denominations. It never really resonated with me. So as an adult, I probably would have identified as a Christian, the faith of my family, but I was, virtually unplugged from the church. And then in 2014, I had a spiritual awakening. I had been experiencing a season of depression, and it was just persistent and ongoing, this heaviness. And finally, under just a deep pit of despair, I cried out to God. And it wasn't like a moment of a pious prayer or a moment of epiphany. It was more of an if you were there kind of prayer, where I just unleashed my frustrations into the atmosphere, and I was just hoping that something might shift. And then suddenly, in the midst of all that emotional turmoil and ranting, I heard a voice as clear as anything I've ever heard in my life. I mean, to be sure, it was an internal voice, but I heard the words, "Be still." Mm-hmm. And they just penetrated me deeply, and suddenly peace, just overwhelming peace, engulfed me. And it lasted for days, weeks after that event. And I knew that it was God, but I didn't have a context for what had happened to me. So that set me out on a journey of deep truth seeking. And because I'm from a Christian family, that was the doorway that I entered the spiritual journey. I plugged into a few churches, non-denominational for the most part, over the next few years, and I just began to read volumes, just pour over scripture and just study and try to mine out deep truth. And ultimately, I hit a place where I found mainstream Christian answers to life's most important questions just less than satisfying. So it was in that space of a bit of frustration that I kind of broke through into more of a contemplative space, where God is more experiential and less conceptual, where there's room for mystery and grace. And so I found a lot of rest and refreshment in that space. And it was during my time, it was authors like Richard Rohr, Thomas Merton, Cynthia Bourgeois, that, they really opened the door into that reality for me. So, and I became interested in Jungian psychology. So I just began to read mainly Jungian analysts. I find them a lot more digestible than Jung himself, although I have read Jung himself. But yeah, his model of individuation is just, I found it compelling. And so that's what led me into spiritual direction. The Hayden Institute, where I studied spiritual direction, their primary focus is a psycho-spiritual approach to becoming whole and offering space to others as they take the journey inward. So yeah, so that's kind of where I came from and how I landed where I am currently.
How did you know growing up as an evangelical, you got this be still message? So how did you get from that experience to the actual contemplative stuff, since it seems like that's like a hidden gem that isn't, I've been a Christian for like 40 some years before I discovered the contemplative world. And I always thought it was New Age stuff or Catholic. So how did you just even find it coming out of the evangelical church? Do you remember?
Yeah, so for me, I wasn't really, though I was raised in an evangelical Christian context, it didn't resonate with me. And so I wasn't bound to any particular, set of beliefs. And this about me, but I'm a 5 on the Enneagram. And so I don't take things at face value, and the truth is very important to me. Like, truth is paramount to everything else. And so for me, it was a matter of digging deep enough into a truth that's transformative. And also, I would say this, that my experience, and I heard the words "be still," and this is funny, but I didn't realize that was a scripture.
Oh, it's funny.
Yeah. So, and it's like it's everywhere now, and everybody loves that. And they embroider it on things and hang it on their walls. But I was so removed from the Christian element that when I heard the words "be still," I didn't relate it to the scripture at all. I just felt peace, just overwhelming peace. And I think also, as I navigated the evangelical churches after my awakening, the experience that I had, there was like a cognitive dissonance between what was being taught and pushed in these churches versus the experience, that I had the encounter. I felt like I encountered God. It was perfect peace. The light of truth just exploded all the illusions in that moment. And I didn't find that to be so for the most part, in these evangelical churches. And so it was a dissatisfaction. I think that a lot of people are comfortable in evangelical Christianity. And so if you're comfortable, then there's no reason to kind of dig deeper or explore further. But even if the truth blows my life apart, that's what's important to me. And so even if it looks like nothing that I anticipated that it would look like, and it's in those moments that we're able to be upended in a way that really is transformative. So I think it's because I was just open to whatever's true, wherever that may come from and whatever that may look like.
Yeah, and I discovered your work on Instagram. I'm just trying to think. Somebody must have shared your posts, but you Instagram it what Contemplative Reflections. I think your name Brandy Anderson
Yeah.
comes up now, but it's at Contemplative Reflections. And I just encourage everybody to check out Brandy's account because she posts just profound Instagram posts. Like you're literally the first person I asked to be on the podcast just because of their Instagram account. Because I'm always blessed when I read it. And so you just have ability to capture everything you kind of just said, the mystery. You do a lot of shadow kind of posts. I think I can see the Jungian influence, but just before we get into the even deeper on those things, like talk a little bit about your writing process because you're a really clear writer. So like what kind of process do you use to create just the posts that you share?
Yeah, well, really, it's just whatever is bubbling up for me in the moment, like as I sit with things, my own personal contemplative reflections, the things that really penetrate into my own depths, those are the things that I tend to write about. So if it speaks to me, I feel like it will speak to other people. And also, while I do intend to share in a way that may be helpful to other people on similar journeys, writing is also very helpful for me to get my thoughts, iron my thoughts out in a productive way. As a 5 on the Enneagram, I could get caught in the trap of just thinking like internal thoughts. So writing is a way for me to kind of express what's going on internally and just iron it out in a more cohesive manner.
Do you actually sort of intentionally journaling as part of your contemplative practice? Is that a regular piece? So some of this is even kind of coming out of your personal journals?
No, and that's the funny part is that I don't journal. And I kind of look at the contemplative reflections in the blog is kind of like my journal, not as personal as a journal would be, obviously. And I have journaled and I occasionally jot things down or take note of this or that, but I'm not a regular journaler. I just can't seem to stick to it. But I do keep a dream journal.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only consistent journaling that I do.
And is the dream journaling a product of the Jungian influences where a lot of the analysis comes off of kind of recording dreams and such?
Yes. During my time at Hayden, they offer a spiritual direction program, which is what I took part in. And they also offer a 2-year certification in dream work. So dream work is very much a part of everything they do. And so as I navigated through the spiritual direction aspects, which is heavily Jungian based, we had dream work groups. So, and we were encouraged to keep a dream journal during that time. And it's something that I really wasn't looking forward to be honest. I thought, my dreams make no sense. I just, but as I did it and as I took part in the dream groups, working actual dreams with people, I found it to be one of the most transformative parts of the program.
So share a little bit about that. I've personally had recurring dreams that ultimately became part of my own healing journey. So I can sense, the power of that. But what's the process of actually capturing dreams so that, because obviously if you have a strong enough dream, you will remember it. But we dream all the time. And I know I was dreaming last night, but I couldn't tell you what I dreamed. So like how do you do a dream journal so that you can actually capture what's going on, at least whatever you can recall?
Yeah. So a lot of times you do wake up and it's like the dream is fresh in your mind. And then as you awaken, it dissipates. And that's just going to happen. But one thing is when you first wake up, maybe don't open your eyes immediately. Lie there for a moment and try to just remain aware, of where you were in the dream. And then record it immediately. Like, don't think, well, I'm going to have my coffee and then because you'll forget. It just goes away. It vanishes. Even the ones that you think, oh, I wouldn't forget that, you do. There are dreams that I've recorded and thought as I was recording them, I would never forget this. And when I look back, I have no recollection. When I'm reading it, I'm like, wow, it's like news to me all over again. So yeah, some people keep like a recorder next to their bed. And if they wake up in the middle of the night, they'll record or jot down with a little light. I don't really do that. I don't record dreams unless they're profound. in the middle of the night. It's mainly a morning routine for me.
Okay. So some people do actually, that's always my next question was some people actually do, if you wake up, you actually sort of wake up even more and just record the dream. Okay. I gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, that could be helpful.
All right. Well, thank you. So what do you think it is for you? I mean, you got this be still, and I mean, that's about as a contemplative a calling as, I mean, you can really have, but like, what about contemplative spirituality really connected with you that you found so satisfying and fulfilling? I mean, you mentioned mystery, but like, what is it? Can you articulate? It's kind of a hard question, but like, what is it about contemplation that really satisfies your soul, would you say?
I would say it's experience. It's moving beyond conceptualizing spirituality into actually experiencing, which, like you just said, it's hard to put into words because, words in themselves are not the thing. They're the finger pointing at the moon, as the Zen saying goes. But yes, very experiential. That's what I like about the contemplative path. In the beginning, I began with like centering prayer practice, and from there, I've moved into other things. But yeah, so it's just about becoming aware and cultivating a sustained awareness of our oneness with God, our oneness with the divine, and from that flows peace. That's where and wholeness, and that's because that's really how we get lost, to see ourselves as separate and superior. That's where all manner of sin, all manner of war and violence and all those things spring from. So it's just an awakening into our true identity, our true self, our oneness.
That's so powerful. And you mentioned centering prayer. When you talk about contemplation, you mentioned you're not a journaler, so you don't do a lot of prayer of exam and stuff. So like, for lack of better words, I'm just going to say modalities. So like what other sort of contemplative practices or habits do you find helpful?
So centering prayer has been really helpful. And then from there, I added mindfulness, which is more of an Eastern, you don't see that so much in Christian circles, although it coincides beautifully with centering prayer. And it's been extremely helpful to me. It's something that you would apply more in your daily activities. It's just a returning to center in every moment, like if you find yourself caught up in thought, just return to your breath, return to center, and put space between yourself and your thoughts and your emotions so that you can observe without judgment, and with curiosity the processes, because until we explore those inner processes, we can't become whole. I mean, you have to have some level of self-awareness to ever get out of the trap, our compulsions, the complexes. So mindfulness has been extremely helpful. Probably maybe the most helpful. It's just a practice of presence, to put it simply. I mean, there's nothing fancy about it. It's just like be present in every moment and notice what's going on internally. And I also like Lectio Divina. That's something that I have like as a reflection tool. It's less of it's more of just a self-reflection tool. I would do that, or maybe even the tarot, which you don't hear about that in many Christian circles, but in the Hayden's spiritual direction, tarot was introduced in a way that was extremely helpful. The cards, have archetypal significance. So to draw a card for reflection and to reflect on the archetypal meanings, and how that resonates with what is coming up for you in that moment. It really gets into the depths of the unconscious, and kind of how things are swirling underneath the surface. So that's been helpful. So I would say tarot, reflection, centering prayer, mindfulness are most helpful to me.
A quick question on mindfulness, and I actually want to come back to the tarot too. But you made a distinction between centering prayer and mindfulness, which I think is right. Do you make any distinction between again, I'm not trying to judge another religion or even a secular technique by the question. the technique's the same. I mean, the centering prayer and mindfulness is almost the same. I mean, I've studied some Vipassana, myself. To me, it's always about the intention, the idea that I'm going to sit with Jesus. So there's that intention there. Does that come into the mindfulness? And again, I'm not trying to say you shouldn't follow your breath, but I think you're tracking with me. But it isn't because when some people hear mindfulness, oh, you're just you're not a Christian anymore. You're just a Buddhist or whatever. But right. That's not what you're actually saying. You're just talking about practicing the presence of God, if you will, about like a Brother Lawrence type of thing. And you're just noticing a technique that lets you, I'd almost say you could do centering prayer the same way. You just use your prayer word and recenter in the same way that you're talking about. So is there a distinction that you make beyond kind of what I'm trying to hear what you're saying so I can learn, what am I missing from what you just heard me say to what you're trying to communicate?
Yeah. So, I would begin by saying that there is no secular world. There's only the sacred twisted in darkness. So when I follow my breath, God is in that.
Yeah.
When I wash the dishes, God is in that.
Yes.
God is within us in every moment. God is being itself. So to return to center, I pay attention to my breath so that I can become centered. And from that state of centeredness, in that present moment, I'm able to experience the divine flow. The move of spirit in that moment is to quiet oneself. And so while centering prayer is a thing you do, you set aside time. So usually it's a 20-minute sit in the morning, and you sit down and you devote yourself to 20 minutes of quiet. But as you're going about your busy day and you're having, interactions with other people and you're at work and, and life is hectic, in those moments, it might not be realistic to take a 20-minute prayer sit. So in those moments, you could literally just take a few breaths. I mean, and notice your breath in a way that brings you back to center, and, and you can call it what you want, the breath of God is the breath that we breathe anyway. So if, you return to God, return to center. So I would say the distinction, centering prayer, you come to that with the intention to connect with, I don't want to say connect with, because we're always connected with the divine, but to become aware of our connection with the divine, to just soak in that, to have your focus on God during that time. Mindfulness is more about what's going on in me as I process the world around me. What emotions are repetitive? What narrative am I spinning around my circumstances that keeps me trapped? Because that really is, that's the shadow at work in us that keeps us bound up. It's like, do we have a shadow, or does the shadow have us? Jung said, how do you see a lion that has swallowed you? And so, and that's what it is. And that's the root of all Christian practice, really at heart, is about noticing those things, the ego, and getting out of those compulsions. But we can't get away from that. We can't be set free from that if we're not aware of that. So, as you're in an argument with someone, are you caught up in the argument, or are you projecting onto them and they're projecting onto you, or can you step aside like a good matador and just let those things go by and notice them with, just put your awareness on them. And so I don't think there's anything, Buddhist about that. I think it's just a very human way to approach our own spirituality. We're not just spirit, we're an entire human being. And so our wholeness is essential.
Love it. Thank you. I thought that was a really compelling answer. Do you, I lost my thought here. I wanted to go back. Oh, do you do any somatic practices? Now, you almost sound like you got there when you were talking about the mindfulness, because you're noticing what's going on the inside. Do you do anything with sensations in the body, pains, aches, that sort of thing, and track through that as a way to deepen your connection with the divine?
I practice Tai Chi, and I added that last. I'm a 5 on the Enneagram, so I like these contemplative practices, that are about watching the thoughts and releasing thought, because for me, thoughts are my compulsion. But Also, as a 5, it would be easy for me to retreat into my headspace and not be very embodied. So Tai Chi has been instrumental. It's a mindful movement. And so it just brings me into the present moment, into my body, to become aware of any tensions, the way that the energy is flowing. And it's a very, unlike yoga, it's a very circular. It's softness overcomes hardness, in Tai Chi. So it's a very, I don't know, just it's soft. It's a way of just being present in a very circular, fluid type motion. So that I find that very helpful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, let me ask you a little bit about the tarot. I don't know very much about them. I mean, I've seen the cards, and I think there's another Instagram account I follow that I forget what her name is. I think last name is Moeller, that just wrote a book on tarot with I think within Roman Catholicism or something. So I've seen some of her posts. So you using these for archetypes, and I don't know if that's what I guess that's what they always were. They're cards of archetypes, but you're reading is through like a Jungian lens through your training, I take it. So like how do the tarot cards help a person to, I guess, see their shadow or see undeveloped parts of themselves? I don't know how the language is. So like, how is that a spiritual practice?
Yeah, so every card has an image, and I mean, there are so many tarot decks on the market. Different cartoon characters, or whatever your movie themes, but the traditional Rider-Waite deck is what I use, because that's what was recommended by the person who lectured where I learned about tarot. But each one represents like an archetype. It's the hero's journey, the Jungian model of the hero's journey, and like card 0 is the fool. And so it depicts like a young guy who has like a little sack over his shoulder, like a little stick with a little sack. And I mean, really, there's no more than maybe a sack lunch in that sack. He's very light and free, and he's looking out at the horizon, but he's about to step over a cliff. And there's a little dog swirling around his feet. And so the imagery in that card, it just represents that innocent, uninhibited beginning that we all start there. And in some ways we come back full circle to that, because the fool is really no fool at all. He's unashamed. He's present in the moment. He's living life fully. And his little dog is a representation of the divine protection. Like he's guarded, even though he's stepping off of a cliff, he has this protection around him. So as we sit with the cards, and they represent so much, and you can look at the artwork, and like I said, there's so many decks, and it evokes something in you, and you kind of just reflect on how that resonates with where you are in your own journey in that moment, because everything is fluid. A lot of people push against the tarot because they're like, oh, it's a divination tool. Well, first of all, casting lots and the ephod, and I mean, that's divination 101. So divination was throughout scripture, but I think it's because people think that they're used to like predict the future. But in my view, the future is fluid, so it's impossible to predict future. But what you can do is take a glimpse or a snapshot of particular patterns, repetitive thoughts and patterns and compulsions and propensities in our lives. And those things do tend to produce particular outcomes. So while you may not could predict the future, you could say, well, this person is headed in this direction, and they're likely to end up here based on these propensities, these compulsions, these thoughts. And so the tarot is just a tool to help you reflect on your own inner processes, the direction that you're headed in any moment. It's not definitive. It's not saying you're going to end up here. It's saying, hey, you could address this, and you could take a different, it brings awareness so that you could maybe alter how things turn out for yourself.
No, I think that makes sense. And yeah, I think the key word is like you said, it's like it's not so much divination as it isn't like illumination. In a way, it's kind of like a pre-critical personality test in a way. I mean, that's not saying it the right way either, but it's not unlike some of these things that aren't describing your not predestined you to something. They're describing pieces of yourself that if you would not alter or not change your course, you might end up a certain place. I think that's what I'm hearing you say. So that's really interesting.
Yes.
So thank you for bringing that up, because I think you're the first person that talked about all that on the show. Talk a little bit about Jung. Again, I could pick your brain, I think, for hours on some of this stuff. You did your spiritual direction heavily focused on Jung, and I guess that's where the psycho-spiritual label even comes in. Talk about how that gives you a distinct form of spiritual direction, and maybe also tease out a little bit, like, what do you wish Christians knew about Jung that you found most people don't know about that would be helpful?
Yeah, so Jungian psychology is influenced by spirituality. I mean, Jung was a deeply spiritual, he was a mystic, so
and his family, his parents were pastors, or brothers, or his family and stuff he's from a family of pastors, basically.
Yeah, and he had phenomenal spiritual experiences and communication with spirits. Just all kinds of things that shaped his view, his work. So Jung in and of himself is psycho-spiritual. But that would influence spiritual direction for me in a way that it just offers a model of the psyche, or a model. It offers a model of the psyche and a map for navigating the depths of the unconscious, I would say, in a way that integrates the shadow aspects and allows us to live within that tension of opposites that is within us and within all of creation. I think a strictly spiritual approach would maybe attempt to kill the ego. I hear some people in spiritual circles talk about kill the ego, but you can't kill the ego. The ego is necessary. It's not bad.
Right.
It's a container, and up to a certain point, it serves us well. And then when we come to the end of that, it's time to do our inner work and integrate everything. So, I would say that Jung's work would encourage us to just welcome the various aspects of ourselves that we've traditionally repressed or denied, and integrate them so that we can become a whole person. And you asked, I guess the second part of your question was some takeaways.
That maybe most Christians might not know about Jung that you found helpful. Like, what would be some takeaways that maybe people in the church need to be aware of?
Probably the most important takeaway that is largely missed in Western Christianity, I believe, is that we meet God in the darkness, not in the light. In Exodus 20:21, it says that as the people stood in the distance, Moses entered into the deep darkness where God was. I mean, that's probably my favorite verse. Most people are like, they like the verses that are like, be still and know that I am God. But this verse for me is it. I think it encapsulates beautifully the spiritual journey. People do tend to shrink back from that, and Moses entered into that. And so it's the traits that we present to the world and that are generally inauthentic. That's the light. It's the manufactured qualities, and that's what we find favorable. And that's not where we meet God. But our shadow qualities, which I should say that the shadow is not bad, it's just hidden. It's unconscious. But the shadow qualities are the things that we hide from ourselves and others, and they're really more genuine and closer to center. And so that's where we meet God. And I think, as Jung noted, if we fail to make the unconscious conscious, it'll determine our lives, and we'll call it fate. And so we cannot become whole by avoiding the darkness. We have to shine a light into the awareness, into the darkness. And modern Western Christianity, there's a tendency just to avoid darkness and lean into the light, attempt to bypass the real shadow work. I see it as mainly a system of sin management. And it just really fuels the ego fire, and it perpetuates great evil. It's when we fail to recognize our shadow that it becomes evil. It's not evil in and of itself. It's when we cut it off, when we uninvite it to the party. That's when it wreaks havoc. Ken Wilber coined the phrase spiritual bypassing. It's when we avoid the difficult processes of facing our own junk and our own shadow issues, and instead we press into what we consider favorable. And I see that in the Western church. It's really prevalent, and it's disastrous for the people who are stuck there. I think to get stuck there would be the greatest tragedy of life. But yes, Wilbur also insightfully noted that the Western church is essentially just the ego dressed in drag. And that to me is a hilarious and apt way to kind of describe it. So, but the reconciliation of opposites, we find that all throughout Scripture, and the church avoids this. They just really skirt around it. But the tension of opposites is there. Christ himself is a tension of opposites, perfectly reconciled and balanced. And he's an intersection of the divine and the human. The prototype of the reconciliation of opposites and our God into the realm of the out of conflict and duality. I would say it's a non-dual. And then the psalmist declared, "You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies." It's in the presence of the enemies, that the psalmist finds peace. So we have to welcome, all of those undesirable adversaries to our table if we're ever be reconciled and find peace. And then Isaiah, he intuited the truth beautifully when he prophesied that the coming reconciliation of opposites would usher in universal peace. He foresaw a time when the wolf would lie down with the lamb and the leopard with the baby and so forth. So then you come to understand that genuine healing comes through reconciliation of opposites and not the elimination of what we deem undesirable.
Powerful. Yeah, that's really powerful. And so, yeah. And then obviously even Paul and Christ, there's no male or female, slave or free, Jew or Gentile. So you see this non-dual thing. Yeah, I'm still sitting back on the Exodus verse there too. I mean, you pick that and you pick those themes up in like the cloud of unknowing.
Yeah.
Where you read that. Again, I you just got my brain buzzing here now. It's interesting. And you may or may not know this. You probably know it, but that verse in 1 Kings 19 where Elijah goes back to Horeb looking for he needs a spectacular sign, and in the old King James says he heard a still small voice, but I don't know if you ever looked at it. It's actually he heard the sound of utter silence. So it was like that goes along with the same thing you're talking about essentially, right?
Right. That's it. I mean, it's in the silence. It's when the Zen saying that how do you get rid of muddied water? You make it still, or something like, in the stillness, muddy water becomes clear. And so that's what it is. I mean, God is within us. And so we have to still ourselves, quiet our minds, calm our nervous systems. And it's in that silence, which that's what centering prayer is about. It's about, becoming silent within so that we can hear God within. And that's how we communicate. That's how we're led by the Spirit. And you can't be led by the Spirit and you can't have, divine insights when your own thoughts and emotions are just swirling around in chaos. So yeah, it's definitely in the silence that we're able to see the truth, see through the illusion, I would say.
Yeah, and I'll just want to, readers know that if you listen enough of my podcast, I have some episodes where I've talked about my deconstruction phases and how healing prayer or centering prayer brought healing and stuff after my difficult times. I know the metaphor that I've always used is I always felt like I was hanging on to the edge of an abyss and there was no way to get back out of it. And then one day I just gave up and surrendered and fell into the utter blackness. And it was at that moment that my faith came back on, which still was kind of, it was like, why did it take so long to get this lesson? But I think I'm hearing you basically saying I just should have jumped right in right at the beginning and I'd have been a little bit better off. I thought I was lost. And in fact, I was inches from, my own bullheadedness was hanging on for dear life to the experience that was ultimately going to engulf me in, at least moments of pure divine love. So that's so thanks for articulating that so well. So some takeaways for listeners. There's that. What's that guy's name? Joseph Campbell has that quote: "The cave you are afraid to enter holds the treasure that you seek." I mean,
Yes.
Moses goes into the darkness. So if you're listening and you're like, okay, I'm not so sure about all this stuff, but like, how do you help a person that comes to you for direction start to lean into some shadow work? Because that seems like that's my favorite post you put up with these really deep kind of reflections. So how do you, or maybe just look at your Instagram account, but it's like, how do you start to help somebody lean into the shadow? Because it's scary.
Right. I would say, a lot of times people don't know where to begin, like we're bombarded by thoughts and sensations, emotions, so it's like, where to even begin? How do I even, get there, start out? So I tell people to start with a practice, some type of contemplative practice that quiets the mind and calms the nervous system so that they can take a glimpse, like I've said before, but also is to notice the repetitive thoughts. It's not just thought, it's the repetitive thoughts. It's the narrative that we spin. It's the filter that we see everything through. It's the repetitive feelings, the repetitive, bodily sensations that are coming up for us. So it's just to start to take like an inventory, just to notice without judgment, and without resisting, in a curious way, just notice those things and then give them a separate identity, realize that, that critical, aspect is not me, or notice also like that the feelings are not you and you're not your thoughts and you're not your feelings. So it's like to put space between you and what's kind of coming up. So it's like, I'm not angry, I feel anger. It's kind of like to house it in that kind of framework. And then from there, it's really, as you shine the light of your awareness on these things, they lose a grip on you. It's really not so much that you let go of anything, that implies some sort of effort on our part to release, to let go of, and people are like, oh, I'm trying to let go. And it's like, you can't try, it's not an effort, it's effortless. It's like a cork on the sea. So really it's not a matter of letting go, it's a matter of just noticing these things, and as you shine the light of your awareness on them, if you look unflinchingly, the light of truth, they lose their grip.
Do you actually do exercises, because you mentioned the labeling, like if you realize you're angry, or I think that was the emotion that you used, do you actually recommend people getting like a list of emotions, especially if they have a reduced vocabulary, just to learn? So like, because the difference between being angry, being annoyed, being furious, and all those,
Sure.
do you do that kind of thing too, to actually learn to build awareness by actually correctly labeling what's coming up? Is that part of your process?
Yeah, I think that could be extremely, I was just talking to a friend about that. She was saying that she was using an emotion wheel.
Yeah.
And
I've seen that.
so, and I think that could be very helpful for people. In spiritual direction, it's more about providing space for people to take that dive inward on their own. And it's about just asking the right questions. You don't give people answers. The answers are within them already. You just kind of ask questions